Hello to the world and welcome to Sikkim, a tiny landlocked country tucked away in the heart of the Himalayas, forgotten by all as a footnote of history and described by many in the Victoria 3 community as the hardest start in the game. Sikkim has an unreasonably tiny population. It only has one military unit to its name. It's surrounded by major powers with beefy militaries, and its only expansion possibilities are its two Himalayan neighbors who are much, much stronger than them at the start of the game. You would probably agree that Sikkim is the hardest start in Victoria 3 based on this information. But what if I told you that it wasn't the hardest start in Victoria 3? What if I told you that through the use of very basic mechanics, you could turn this unreasonably difficult landlocked start into a relatively simple game that's almost as easy as the Pakistani, Afghanistani, or Tajikistani miners? You'd probably think I'm crazy, the type of person who would tell you such vitriolic lies under the pretense of clickbaiting you into watching, or that I abuse RNG or exploits to do things that will be patched out at a later date. Again, what if I told you that the mechanics used in this video have been in the game since day one, aren't considered an exploit at all, and are 100% recreatable each and every game without the use of RNG? If you're willing to believe what I say to be true, then I encourage you to sit back, grab yourself a nice cup of butter tea, and stay a while and listen. How you set the game up is pivotal to how successful you'll be as Sikkim. Why? Because despite the fact that there is zero RNG involved in this guide, you'll have to do something blasphemous. You'll have to reduce the AI behavior to lenient. I know, it's horrible, but it's absolutely necessary for you to do anything as Sikkim. I have found other ways, but they require exploits, and we're here to play fair, now aren't we? Day 1, Sikkim is in every bit of a horrible state as you'd assume it to be. Yet, there appears to be a bit of a kerfuffle going on over in the Punjabi region of India. Ladakh appears to be under attack by its neighbor Khalsa Raj. We're going to take advantage of this chaos, but to do so, there is some setup required first. Take a moment to look at the British East India Company's government. Notice how they have the armed forces in their government? We want to copy them, and we want to immediately go into our government tab to bring in the armed forces. Doing this will make our governments relatively similar, making them like us just a little bit more. While you're in the government screen, you might as well go into laws and pick out professional army as your first law. We won't be doing much economy work this early into the run, and our goal will be to maximize our military gains as early as possible. For our early construction, we're going to build some armies to bolster our forces. Initially, they won't be much use to us, but much later on, after we go after our neighbors, it'll be helpful to have that little bit of extra firepower. Drop a road maintenance and a social mobility decree while you're at it. You can use the leftover authority for consumption taxes if you want, but it isn't necessary yet. Next, we'll also go into the technology screen and pick out line infantry as our first technology. As important as literacy is to us, we're going to be dead set focused on early game conquest, and getting line infantry before our enemies do gives us an extreme advantage over them. We'll also rival Chitral, Nepal, and Bhutan, but again, this early into the run it isn't particularly necessary as things are going to drastically change later on. We will still take the time to improve our relations with Qing, British East India Company, and Great Britain though. Next, right-click on Khalsa Raj's puppet Jammu. You'll notice at this point that Kashmir is considered part of the Himalayas, and we can actually declare conquest on it, so let's do so right now. Yet we only have a single army to work with. Worse, we can't actually send our army to take on Khalsa Raj. So what do? Well, remember our setup. The +5 similar government bonus plus the +13 sympathy bonus given to us by the lenient diplomacy AI factors in at this point. It's just enough for us to be able to lure the British East India Company into our war by an acceptance score of 2 when it comes to the war goal of returning Punjab. By offering them Punjab, the East India Company then proceeds to take Khalsa Raj to task, and before you know it, we have conquered Kashmir without doing a single thing. Not a single exploit was used here either. These are all basic mechanics used to their full efficiency. Now that we own Kashmir, I want you to incorporate Kashmir. Don't worry about the bureaucracy loss. It's fine. You'll be fine. Just trust me on this. This is very important for later. Now that we actually have to worry about our army, let's go into the budget screen and we're going to turn our military wages to very high. It's also best to take this moment to add liquor and opium supplements to your troops for that little bit of extra morale recovery. You'll start to notice at this point that we have a very sizable standing army. It's not a gargantuan amount by any measure, but with some defensive bonuses, we could easily take on our neighbors. So let's take advantage of our newfound power and begin by taking our neighbor Bhutan. As expected, Bhutan falls without much of a fight due to the sheer difference in military power between us. So let's now move on to taking out Nepal. They're larger than us, so we'll have to use defensive positions to wheedle down their reserves until we're the stronger ones. Then once that happens, we can take Nepal with relative ease. Uh-oh. Looks like we've run out of possible expansion routes, right? We can't send our troops to Kashmir. Worse, Tibet is controlled by Qing, who would absolutely dominate us. The East India Company would also ruin our evenings if we tried anything silly like picking a fight with them. Granted, we could just sit here and modernize our country with what we have now. You'd probably have yourself a decent little run if you did that. But where's the fun in a mere decent run? Especially since Kashmir is completely cut off from our market access and absolutely worthless to us as a result. You could release them as a subject and use them as a puppet to have them personally attack and defeat Chitral for us to tributize them as well. This would be a serviceable, if difficult, way of expanding. Still, I've come up with a solution so ingenious that even other amazing and talented Victoria 3 YouTubers, who you should 100% watch and subscribe to, I put a link to their page below, couldn't come up with as an answer when asked about how I managed to turn Sikkim into a regional power before 1860. For now, take a look at our army headquarters. It's in the eastern Himalayas. Since conquering Bhutan and Nepal, it appears to have been positioned right in the heart of Bhutan. But we want our troops to be over on Kashmir side now, don't we? So here's how I did it. Step 1 is to change your capital to Kashmir the moment it's done incorporating completely. It shouldn't take very long for incorporation to happen since they're a relatively accepted culture to yours. Step 2 is to then go and release Bhutan as a subject nation to you. Now look at what happens. The army headquarters moved from the eastern Himalayas to our capital in Kashmir. Amazing! What happened to our armies? Well, would you look at that? Our entire army force has moved from the eastern Himalayas to Kashmir. Still, Kashmir has 0% market access, and that is hurting our ability to wage war. So I want you to go and move your market to Kashmir too. The Himalayas will suffer, but unfortunately, despite the Himalayas being our homelands, we aren't going to be needing them anymore. Sikkim is now Kashmir, and Kashmir is now Sikkim! Now there are two ways of going forward. You can build up your GDP and army to get enough prestige to be able to declare an interest, or you can deliberately run laws that give you a chance for the playwright to pop. Going for the playwright is fairly RNG heavy, but thanks to the beefy nature of Kashmir's population and access to iron and logging camps, you will be able to create a decent little construction sector state here alone. It won't have coal for later usage, but it's decent enough that we can exploit it in the early game. However you choose to get it, if you manage to get an interest, place it down on the Persian interest area and immediately attack Chitral once it's down. I personally went with conquest on both states because I wanted a permanent interest in Persia, which would allow me to begin the path of moving like a snake down towards the Persian Gulf shores. There was just one problem. Because I didn't rely on RNG to give me enough prestige to get an interest early, I waited too darn long, and Russia ended up befriending much of the Afghani and Pakistani states surrounding me. Luckily, they weren't friendly enough with Kabul to hem me in. Unfortunately, it has hampered my capability to expand to other states like Herat. Eventually, though, Russia does become friendly with Kabul, which makes them inaccessible to me. However, that is a problem for later. For now, I take the 2 states I need from Kabul and move on. Now that I have a land bridge to their borders, Kalat and Makran become my next focuses. Due to infamy issues and a constant fear of Russia, Qing, and India looming over my head, I deliberately do my best to stay under the 50 infamy mark. This means that I end up transferring Makran as a tribute state rather than conquering them outright. This does slow me down, but it keeps me safe. Of course, I'm not content with merely just having Makran as my tributary. I immediately push to reduce their autonomy the moment the truce is up, because I have the full intention of annexing them the moment it becomes convenient and my infamy is low enough. While Macron remains under siege, I take advantage of Sin's poor relations with France and Great Britain, declaring conquest on them as well, since I know that if I don't do it now, the great powers will start intervening over Sin later. The infamy cost is obscenely high, and we actually put ourselves at danger during these moments, but thankfully during the year-long war with Macron and Sind, no major powers intervene as we maintain great relations with every one of them up until this point. Sadly, even as Macron and Sind fall, the specter of infamy looms over our heads. Once more we end up stuck due to infamy. We're too close to the threshold and we don't have the capacity to stand up to any great powers should they come knocking on our doorstep. So we have to change our focus from conquest to amalgamating what we have. It's been nearly 10 years since our last invasion. Infamy decay ticks away so slowly that it hampers our ambitions, yet we still press on to our next target, Kandahar. My goal is obviously to unite Baluchistan and Bampur since I've been working hard to turn them into my main naval states. However, I take advantage of Kandahar's lack of friends and use it as an opportunity to conquer the entire country. It seemed every single war thus far has been one that has teetered on the edge of oblivion, and Sikkim's fate has always hung in the balance. Yet this war against Kandahar feels different. Sikkim, for the first time in its country's existence, is the greater threat, and Kandahar has little capacity to oppose us. They fall with ease, and we take a great bounty in their former lands. Another small reprieve of conquest happens again due to infamy rising too fast and Russia starting to befriend each and every one of our neighbors. We don't mind too much, since we still haven't modernized to our liking yet. As qualifications in our shoreline states are slowly being remedied, our navy begins growing too, giving us a greater scope in who we can invade as well, so our neighbors won't be the only targets in the future. After a few small skirmishes for a few small parcels of land, we finally bulked up our army enough to take on the largest bordering rival, Persia. We still hunger for states with coal, and they have a multitude of great map-centric states that we could take full advantage of that they aren't using properly. So we're off to conquer them! True, Persia looks to be much larger and much more dangerous than us. However, they are a paper tiger in the wind, and even they know early on when they are beaten. Even though we didn't even bother to call in any other countries to aid us in this war, Persia decides to give up without a fight. Cowards! We were not very fortunate during this run. Despite us conquering Gaza relatively early, Great Britain remained a steadfast ally to Transvaal and Orangi. We weren't given many chances to conquer these important states. Yet, for some reason, Orangi seems to have badmouthed the Queen because Great Britain is no longer supporting them. We can use this to our advantage, declaring on Orangi and pulling Transvaal into the war as well. We easily chipped down Transvaal, conquering it in spite of the fact that they are still very much well loved by Great Britain. Their foolishness in joining the war with Orangi was their undoing, and Orangi without Transvaal to serve as their shield easily falls next. At last, we finally have enough gold mines to fund our construction sector growth. Not to mention, we now have 2 amazing mappy states that we can start to convert into construction hubs. Absolutely perfect! After many years of growth and relative peace, Persia once more exposes its soft underbelly to us and gives us a prime target for further growth to our empire, so we take it without delay. This time, however, rather than giving them an easy out by letting them relinquish a single state, we deliberately primary multiple states in our demands, forcing them to actually fight us face to face. It doesn't appear that fighting is their forte though, as on every front we easily overtake them. Though the war itself ends up as a bit of a slow slog, we are rarely in any disadvantage, and we manage to push the front through the mountainous terrain mile by mile. Eventually we press through and manage to capture each and every single war goal that we set out for. Putting on the defensive fronts, we force them to endure the painful war ticks up until the moment when they capitulate everything that we wanted to us. Once more, we take a bite out of Persia, and they relent. Even with all of the success we've had up until this point, the Russians continue to loom over our heads. We still can't expand into our northern neighbors, and worse, Russia keeps demanding we do our duty as allies and join their wars. Perhaps it was foolish to ally with the Russians in the end. They've drawn us into war after war, which ends up with our shorelines being constantly invaded by Brazil and the United States, while Russia itself sits quietly on their own home fronts without a single troop headed their way. Was this their plan all along? Are we being patsies here? Perhaps it's time we rethink our alliance with the Russians after all. Despite our issues regarding our Russian neighbors, one thing they've done well is to leave Persia completely alone, leaving us to devour them at our leisure. Once more we go to war with Persia, although at this point it's less of a war and more of a feast. At this point, the only thing keeping Persia alive is the fact that I haven't been recognized yet. The infamy costs of taking their hefty lands like Tabriz and Mazandaran are so costly that I couldn't even primary Tabriz. It was lucky they were stupid enough to fight me. Still, we're slowly cutting Persia off as we prepare for their finale. Infamy still remains the bottleneck for us, but then finally, after nearly 60 long years, Sikkim is recognized by the wider community as America signs a treaty of commerce and navigation with us. Had I been a better player, I could have forced this through earlier and made conquest far, far easier. Alas, bad RNG and a myriad of mistakes on my part had led to this point far, far later than I would have preferred. Once more, Russia pulls us into a war with Brazil and the United States. One that we didn't want, but we know we're going to make Russia pay us back in full very shortly. So, once more into the fray we go! Alas, it's a repeat of the last war. We end up being navally invaded a dozen times, while Russia gets to sit on its laurels, pretending it didn't start a fight that we're the ones stuck dealing with. With Russia's little spat dealt with, we soon move on to the final days of Persia. We won't be able to take everything we want in this war, but we take enough primaries that it's the end of an empire for them. We're going to chunk them again, and because they are so very weak, they give up. There's no coming back from this for them. It's over. With Persia cowed into submission and plated up in preparation for the next meal, we need to look for another target for expansion. Someone who is weak compared to us. Someone who is hated enough that we could draw in our allies. Or rather, that one damned ally who has pulled us into 2 worthless wars where we've been endlessly navally invaded. We attacked Qing with the intent of unifying the Himalayas by transferring Tibet to our control. We also put Suzhou and Beijing on the docket because we love free legitimacy and lots of rice fields. Yet, we also forced Russia to join us for effectively nothing. The same crud we got from them. It's payback time, Russia! Qing puts up a decent fight, but our endless swarms of naval invasions open up far too many fronts for them to deal with. We grabbed Beijing and simply defended until the war score worked against them, putting them on the back foot the moment we made landfall. It was a tough fight. Far tougher than I anticipated, yet we still defeated Qing and took a cornucopia of goodies as a result. It's now the final countdown. Persia's death clock is looming large and showcasing very little time left. A solemn reminder of the fleeting nature of existence in a cruel and unforgiving world. It's a shame that a once great empire has fallen so low, driven to the boot heel of the Himalayan kings who seek to dominate them now and forever. Persia, it was nice knowing you. With Persia removed off of the map completely, we turn to the Chinese buffet to the east. Qing once more becomes the target of our ire, this time with the intention of being chunked not for utility, but for the sake of making the Sikkim map look as large as possible on the thumbnail. As you can see by the outcome of this rather quick, short, barely notable war, we succeeded. Thank you, Qing. I appreciate it. The final war of this little playthrough is against Russia. I sadly ran out of time to play this entire game before the video had to come out, but I couldn't just leave Russia alone when it was their stupid little wars for nothing that caused me to take so damn long in the first place. Russia, this is your reckoning! I pull the British in to help me face off against Russia, but there was no need. They are inexplicably technologically backward, still using some line infantry alongside skirmish infantry. We dominate them on every single front and remind them who is the real boss of Asia. Then, like lightning, Russia surrenders, giving me Kabul as a vassal and enough land to remove the ugly bottleneck look on my country. What a perfect ending! We're going to stop it a little early this time around. Unfortunately, time was very short and I had to get this video out on time, so sacrifices had to be made. I still think the lovely map I'm showing of Sikkim here is more than enough though. I won't waste your time with a long outro, so let me just say thank you for watching this far. You are a king! Have a great night and remember, Hail Hydra Cat!